You're listening to Breaking Biz Dev with John Tyerman and Mark Wainwright. Conversations that break down, beat up, and redefine business development for the professional services firms of tomorrow. And now for your hosts, John and Mark.
Hi, gang. Welcome to another episode of Breaking Biz Dev. I'm John Tyerman, and I'm joined by my colleague, as always, Mark Wainwright. Mark, how you doing today?
I'm great, John. This is an exciting conversation, as always. People are like, oh, Mark's going to talk about pricing again. Here we go. No, yeah, it's fun. Pricing is so much fun to talk about. Most experts out there just absolutely loathe it, right? But it's great.
No, there's a lot of psychology that goes into it, and I think that's why I think it's so interesting.
Tons, and it's not what you think. It is really not what you think. I think most experts out there have, either have some way, either personally or sort of organizationally, that they come up with price, right? And we're coming at that from something that is totally foreign to them a lot of times. So I love this one.
So we're beating up pricing today. Is that what you're saying?
We are beating the heck out of pricing today. John, we love them, John. We love those business development professionals, but I'll tell you, probably 3/4 of them aren't even involved with pricing whatsoever. They don't even set price, right? They turn to their, the firm partner or whoever else, and that person's in charge with price. And maybe if they are involved with pricing, maybe they're not being as successful as they could be because maybe they're doing it wrong. Maybe they need some new ideas, right?
Mm-hmm.
So with all the love in the world, John, this the relationship of pricing and our business development, professionals, either if it's their job title or people in firms that are just doing business development, something's got to change.
Price is a major growth lever that can be used to generate more revenue. It can be used to generate higher margins on your service offerings. So yeah, let's get into it. So on today's episode, we're going to talk about some of the complexities of pricing, trying to kind of understand what goes into it. We're going to talk about the elements of a successful pricing strategy, different approaches to pricing. We're going to talk about offering different kinds of options, and then how to leverage cognitive biases.
Wait, what? Is this a psychology podcast or is this a sales and marketing podcast?
They all blend together, right?
Yeah, it's all together. And I'll tell you, when a buyer is, backed against the wall, feeling like they're needing to make a decision, and all this stuff starts firing off in their brain, right? So we are at that point, we are no longer dealing with rational thinking. We're no longer dealing with sort of 1 + 1 is 2 stuff. None of that. Like none of it starts making any sense. And a lot of that is based in, just how we are as human beings, what's going on in our brains. And we're going to chat a little bit about that.
Well, hopefully by the time you've introduced pricing on its own, you've already developed a statement of understanding with your buyers, and you understand what their challenges are and how your solution fits in. But let's start with like some of the just understanding, just base foundational elements. What goes into pricing? What if firms get wrong about pricing and when they're presenting solutions?
It has to happen at some point, right? At some point, you have to talk about dollars and cents, folks. I'm sorry, right? There's a number of things that are happening that happen in the world of professional services relative to pricing that many firms get wrong, right? You can wait too late to talk about pricing. First and foremost, it is important to start introducing the idea of pricing up front. And what I mean by that is that, these are complex, expensive professional services. It's important early on to get very real, and most individuals will intentionally steer clear and leave out price in the early conversations. That should not be happening, right? You should talk very early on and say, look, this is a complex, expensive thing, right? Are you coming into this eyes wide open, believing that, this is going to be, it's not going to be inexpensive, right? This is going to cost something, but, hopefully together we can all completely stay focused on value, right? yes, there is a cost involved with this, but hopefully what you're going to get out of this, the value that you achieve from this work that we will potentially do together, will be many multiples in value of that. So it's important early on to start talking about price, and like you said, range, absolutely right.
I see. I see you setting this up. You said earlier on a past episode about how strategy is focused externally, right?
Mhm.
And so I picked up on little notes of what you were just saying there, Mark. You're talking about how this deal is going to create value for you, the client, right?
Right. Right.
Well, and I guess another reason why you want to bring up price early in the conversation is, to go through that BANT qualification process, right? Do they have the
Yeah.
budget? I guess pricing is sort of a flinch test of that.
It is. I don't, and anybody who's spent any time with me, in the work I do, I don't focus too much on budget, because I believe most organizations um, uh, under consider the complexity, undervalue the complexity of things just in general,
Mhm.
right? So I think setting a budget is oftentimes an artificial way to kind of approach sort of solving a problem. It's very real in some cases. I don't want to completely walk away from that whole budget idea, but one of the other considerations is that, look, if you actually are looking to really achieve what you want to achieve, if you really want to sort this whole thing out, then you probably need to be talking to people that are high enough in the organization where sort of budget, a specific line item on an annual budget, is less and less of an issue.
Mm.
Because I think if you're talking to the right people in the organization, then they're the ones that are completely in control of the budget, right? They're the ones that are saying, look, I think this opportunity that's right in front of us right now is a better use of our time and energy and dollars. I know we had a budget figure written down somewhere, but it seems like this is a pressing need. So, I don't want to kind of think that budgets don't exist, because they do, but it's important to make sure that we are working with the right people, that budget is a secondary concern relative to the results that they want to achieve. And like you just said right there, right? I said that, first thing was big picture, dollars need to be talked about early on. Second thing is we need to be laser focused and completely staring at the client when we are pricing, right? This needs to be an external activity. This is completely focused on them, their priorities, their preferences, their needs, et cetera. And we need to be pricing that, right? And we'll get to what else happens in the world of price, but it needs to be an external exercise. We need to be looking at the client.
So let's dig into that. So what are, if we need to be looking at the client, what are some of the things that we need to be looking at? What are some of the elements that go into kind of building this pricing strategy?
Yeah. External focus obviously is one.
Yeah.
This is all centered on the client. Positioning is another big one. And I think people think positioning is marketing, but positioning is critical when it comes to pricing. Sequence. What do I talk about when? What do I do first? What do I do next? What do we do next? Yes, there is a sequence that, an individual that is part of an organization should move through these various sort of pricing conversations. That's critical. And I touched on it just a second ago. Uncovering needs, priorities, and preferences is super important in the early discovery, process, in your sales process, so that you're figuring out what someone will pay for. Right. Because if you start offering solutions, ideas, whatever else that they don't assign any value to, you're not going to get very far.
What really is interesting to me, Mark, is the sequence of what to present and when to present it.
Yeah.
That's very interesting to me. And then uncovering your needs, priorities, and preferences of the buyer. What are they going to pay for?
Right.
Presenting those options. And then you've got another bullet here: negotiating with a win-win mindset. I don't think we touched on that one.
I think it's negotiation is part of pricing, because obviously that's the thing that is happening towards the end, and most practitioners, most professional services firms who are reaching sort of that 11th hour of the sale, right? The contract will concede. They will often, take 10% off, take 20% off, whatever it is to make to appease the buyer. And it's really critical to come into any pricing situation to develop a pricing strategy that is prepared for that and arms the practitioner in those conversations with what they need to come out of it with a win-win situation, right? If you're going to concede on price, then the buyer needs to make certain concessions that are of some equal value to you, right? There's a whole bunch of ways that you can do this. Oh, sure, we'll take 20% off, but how about if you pay us 100% up front? Oh, okay. So the buyer gets what they want, and maybe you get what you want because, maybe you're existing in a world where, your accounts receivable, you've got, a long list of clients who are, overdue, who don't pay you on time. And you're thinking, yeah, sure, we'll knock some money off, but you're going to pay us up front. So that's one puzzle piece of this greater sort of pricing strategy, that negotiation stuff. And there's a whole bunch of different ways that you can approach that. So yeah, that's an important part.
So we've got all these ingredients,
yeah,
to a pricing strategy. Let's go in the kitchen. Let's start cooking something up. So what are some different ways that professional services firms can take these different ingredients and put together a pricing strategy?
Well, yeah, let's provide a little bit of little context of how firms now create, how they develop price. So there are a number of ways. We can talk about three. There's three that are sort of top of mind for most folks. One is cost plus, one is market based, and one is value based. Right. So those are three methodologies that a firm can use to come up with price. The first one, cost plus, has to do with understanding what your costs are. You're sitting in front of a lovely brick wall right there, John. Let's think of each sort of unit that you are selling. Most professional services firms deal with hours, right?
Right.
So someone is going to assemble a price with 1,000 bricks, 2,000, 10,000, whatever the number of hours is. They throw those in a big pile. They add a little margin to that, and that's the price, right? And the vast majority of firms that I know that I work with approach it that way, right? Unfortunately, that kind of ticks the number one error on our list, right? It's completely internally focused. It's not focused on the client problem. Okay. Number two, market-based. Market-based has very little to do with your internal costs and very, very little to do with a specific client. It has to do with a marketplace, right? How are we going to price our product or service in the marketplace? Maybe you're able to identify competitors who are offering a low-priced offering. Maybe you are able to identify competitors that are, high-priced options, and you think, oh, well, we want to find that Goldilocks sweet spot, so we're gonna price our offering right in the middle, right? So you're thinking, okay, we're going to sell a higher volume of whatever this is at a particular dollar amount, because high-priced options you tend to sell a lower number of. Low-priced options you tend to sell a higher number of, and that's the whole economics of the thing. So it's completely market-based. It's not focused on a specific client. It's not focused on your costs necessarily. It takes into account your costs, but it's not completely based on your costs.
Okay, so
that's market.
Let me see if I got this right. So cost plus, I like the way that you phrase that. It's internally focused. It's focused on your cost. You're adding margin to it, so you're purely focused on pricing your solution to benefit your business. Mm-hmm. Whereas market pricing is externally focused, but externally focused on the wrong player, right? So you're focused on what the competitors are doing, not necessarily what your customers value the most.
Great.
And so
great.
Am I right to assume that value pricing is focused externally on what the customer values?
You nailed it. Yeah. The approach, the concept with value pricing is, it is not simple, but I will say it is simply, what value does the prospective client assign to the outcomes that you are going to help them achieve? And you as a consultant, what is your fair share of that success, right? That's it kind of in a sentence, but it's harder to get to.
Yeah.
Not the least of which reasons is that most buyers of very complex, very high dollar professional services, at least that I'm aware of, kind of hold their cards pretty close to their vest, right? They're not oversharers when it comes to, oh yeah, we're gonna see tens of millions of dollars of ultimate financial benefit from this work that you're doing for basically pennies for us. So so that's one of the challenges. But yes, that last one is an important one, and we could talk for out days on value pricing. It's a fascinating concept, but one thing I will say about value pricing is value pricing presents the opportunity for you to kind of reduce the downward pressure on you when you are pricing something, right? Because if you're looking at the client and they're receiving many multiples of value, or potential value of the work to be done, then everybody's looking at the client, the value they're achieving, and your price kind of fades, right? It's really not that critical because the client is thinking all of a sudden, whoa, if this work that we do with these consultants can help us achieve this thing, then yeah, price isn't ultimately as big of a deal as we kind of thought it was. Yeah, and it might cost a little bit more than we thought it, initially, but wow, if we can really, get there, this is fantastic. So it doesn't open the door for you to charge, dramatically more for your services. What I think it does most importantly and most practically is that it starts to lessen the downward pressure on price, right? It gets everybody kind of focused on the client and focused on the right thing, which is the client value, not price.
We talked about those 3 different ways that firms can approach pricing. So now that we understand how firms can approach those different pricing structures, what should firms consider when developing choice architecture? I guess, first of all, what is choice architecture? And then how can firms build that into their pricing?
Right. You just sent all of my dear friends who are hopefully listening, who are in the world of architecture, where many industries have co-opted that term, architect and architecture. Right. You can go search for a job that's an architect nowadays, and half of them you're going to come up with some systems architect, right? Who's an IT person. So we just yet again co-opted the term architecture.
Please forgive me.
Yeah, right. We'll see if they forgive you. Choice architecture is all wrapped up and combined with it. It's a consideration on how you are presenting pricing, right? And all kind of wound up in choice architecture is presenting options and the right options. Presenting kind of the features, benefits, desired outcomes, et cetera, how you actually kind of not just visually, but also sort of how you are discussing pricing when it comes to that point where you're actually starting to talk this through. Okay, we've gotten our understanding, and we've come up with some ideas that we want to talk to you about, and we've got some 3 options here. Right. So choice architecture is how all of these things are all put together in a way that could sort of enables, good decision making from a client perspective. Right. So that's a lot of this, all of this sales stuff. John, I'm one of those guys who likes to simmer it down to like a couple big ideas. Right. All the sales stuff has to do with facilitating good decision making from a client perspective. Right. This isn't about, we're going to try to wring as many dollars as we possibly can out of your prospective clients. This is, we need to facilitate decision-making and steer them towards the right decisions, because a lot of times these prospective clients, they're having a hard time because this is complex and difficult. And, they might pick the wrong one, right? Which is not actually going to help them achieve what they ultimately want to achieve, right? So they make bad purchasing decisions. So all this stuff we're talking about today is kind of involved in that. So that's the big picture on this choice architecture, but we're going to get into the details.
You mentioned something on an earlier episode, Mark. I think it was when we were talking about good buyers and good sellers and bad sellers, where the salespeople have gone through the sales process multiple times. They've got these reps at it, right? And so their role becomes guiding buyers through that sales process, right? And so I guess there are choice architecture is one way to do that, right? To help them guide buyers through that sales process. So I guess let's I really like the next topic. So I'd really like to get into some of the cognitive biases that salespeople can use to help guide those buyers through a sales process.
Cognitive bias is this often irrational and illogical way that our brains try to make decisions. That's cognitive bias, and cognitive bias comes to play all throughout our lives every day in various certain situations. And the aha moment for me when I was sort of uncovering and learning about cognitive bias was that most individuals out there in the world believe that they are making deliberate, rational, logical decisions in most decision-making situations, and they are not. Right? We are not. I am not. You are not. Right? It's not happening. It is possible for some, decision-making situations to find their way to a place where, we are making well-researched, well-thought-through decision-making. But in a lot of cases, we are not making rational decision-making. And, I got to tell you, the dollars and cents, we'd think that as more dollars and cents are at stake, all those decisions are rational and logical, and they are not. So that is one of the big aha moments. I said, oh, wow. In any type of decision-making situation, not the least of which a buying situation, cognitive bias is at play.
Yeah, I think I read a statistic somewhere, and forgive me, I don't have it in front of me, but it was something to the effect of B2B purchase decisions. The decision is made with emotion and then justified with logic. I think that's really kind of what it boils down to.
I think I've heard that a little bit because eventually, someone thinks that you need to kind of come back in and kind of, rationalize and legitimize, whatever decision that was made. But it's and
that's why
it's cool.
That's why branding is so important in professional services and B2B transactions, is because the company brand can have a major impact on a buyer's predisposition and whether or not they trust you. So I guess maybe that would be an example of a cognitive bias, is a preference toward one brand over another.
Yeah.
But I guess what are some other different specific cognitive biases that professional services seller doers, maybe they're business development managers, maybe they're founders who are in a business development role, what are some examples that they can use in their toolkit?
One that comes to mind, particularly when we are talking about contemporary pricing, and this could be pricing for just about anything. This is commonly seen when you're out there buying software products online, a subscription to something, whatever else, subscription to Salesforce, whatever your, QuickBooks, whenever you're buying your annual tax software, this is all built into that, right? And a lot of times we're talking about these three options, low, medium, high, whatever your three options are. And frankly, offering three options is a fantastic way to help your potential customers buy, right? It's really good. One cognitive bias is the Goldilocks effect. And the Goldilocks effect is that inevitably, if we are presented with three options, we will gravitate towards which one?
The middle one.
The middle one, of course, right? Not too hot, not too cold, whatever, not too hard, not too soft, right? So the Goldilocks effect is at play, right? So the takeaway from the Goldilocks effect, that cognitive bias, is that if we are in a pricing situation and we have come up with a price that we ideally want to sort of, have accepted. Like, this is our price, right? This is the one we want to accept. You must present an option that is above that and below that, right? And you need to obviously rationalize those two, but the Goldilocks effect can't happen with just one option, right? So you have to provide people, who are going through this decision-making process, the buyers, you have to give them the context, right? You have to give them the one that's too hot, and you have to give them the one that's too cold, the one that's too high and too low, right? That's what this is all about, right? So you have to present that context. So this one works great. There's another that is similar, and a lot of these cognitive biases are similar. There's another called the decoy effect. And the decoy effect, again, is based on offering options, let's say offering 3 options, right? One of your options that you put forward can be either an extremely low option or or maybe an extremely high option. Generally speaking, I would say the decoy effect works with a very high option. And what the decoy effect does is simply, when your buyer analyzes, all 3 of your options, they see that there's a very, very high option. They say, oh, whoa, that's way too high. And then all of a sudden they come back to the 2 and they think, oh, those seem pretty reasonable, right? So again, this is not a way to be tricky, John. This is a way to kind of facilitate really good decision-making, right? A lot of times we think if we're just going to give somebody one option, they're going to come in, they're going to say, hey, knock it down 20% and then come back to us. Or we give them 3 options and they're going to take the lowest one. That isn't always the case, right? So we need to approach it very strategically and kind of understand what's at play in their heads right now. So those are 2 good ones.
I like the price anchoring, and it reminds me of a case study of Rolex. And the question is, how do you sell a $2,000 watch? You put it next to a $10,000 watch, right?
That's totally true, right? So you mentioned another is anchoring, right? And when we talked about earlier on about how you approach pricing strategically, and when you talk about it in the sequence of things, right? Generally speaking, you want to make sure that you are anchoring high, typically with a range. And how I do it is, I will talk to prospective clients fairly early on in the conversation, and I will say, yeah, I've done this. I work with firms very similar to yours, and this is the price could be as much as this, right? But I have seen it be less, from the options that you choose and the decisions that you make, right? So it's that. Yes, it could be as much as this, but it could be less depending on your choices, right? So I will always anchor high in those conversations. So I set some that, because that number gets buried inside of their heads.
Yeah.
Right. Ooh, that's that. But I walk it back a little bit. I say, but it could be less. It's entirely possible that it could be less. So that is an example of anchoring.
Excuse me, I didn't mean to jump the gun. I thought that was a good example of the decoy effect, but maybe I'm confusing my different cognitive biases here.
There, like I said, there's a ton of overlap between all of them, and they will wander in, and the primacy effect is another one as well. The primacy effect can be the very first number that someone sees. They place a higher amount of attention and focus and emphasis on that particular number relative to the 2 other numbers. If you're giving them 3 numbers, right? So if you offer them 3 options and you go low, medium, high, maybe they'll encounter that low option first, and they'll weigh that relative to the other options. However, if you flip the script on that and say, we're going to put, we're going to talk through our options. We're going to present our options, and we're going to present the high one first, and then the middle one, then the low one. You present the first one, and they say, whoa, that's crazy. And then the other 2, very similar to the decoy effect, kind of seem more appealing in kind of a decreasing way. And the primacy effect also ties in loss aversion, right? When you introduce that really high priced option that has all of the stuff in it, right? This says, yes, everything and more in it. Then when they move to the second option, they're they immediately start thinking, oh shoot, we're going to lose that and that and that thing, and we really wanted that one particular thing, we're going to lose that. So loss aversion is kind of woven in there together. Yeah, I don't believe there's any hard and fast lines between all of these, but they have some subtle differences, and people will, if people are really interested in cognitive bias, like I said, there are dozens, and many of them are at play in any given situation. So it's really interesting stuff.
Let's kind of wrap up our conversation with a practical thing that our listeners can take away and maybe implement in their next proposal. So what would be one thing that you think our listeners should do based on this conversation, and maybe it's a different way of looking at their pricing structure or something?
Yeah, we talked about some initial ways that organizations come up with price, right? Mm-hmm. Most firms use a cost plus methodology, and I would not recommend that people kind of immediately just throw that one out, right? Okay. Because if you are built in a way where your pricing mechanism, the way you do it in your organization right now is completely focused on that, the billable hour, et cetera, don't bail on that, right? There are various steps that you can take from now until at some point in the future, hopefully where you're uncovering opportunities to value price some of your services. So there's a bunch of stair steps in this, and I would say first and foremost, there are two critical things that any firm can do right now to dramatically change their pricing. One is making sure that your price that you are having pricing conversations, i.e., you are sitting down with your prospective clients and you are talking through price. Right. So when you're going to talk through your options, that one's super easy. Instead of sending them the proposal, right, we're going to talk about price. Here we go. We got an appointment at 10 o'clock Tuesday morning. The four of us are going to get together. We're going to talk through price, right? And the options and everything else. Easy, right? The second one is, like I said, options, right? You can start to take your single price and just pull it apart a little bit and present, a low option and a high option, because those three options give the prospective client the needed context they need to make a decision. What we want to do is we want for them to pick how they will work with you, not if they will work with you, right? So that whole three option kind of process enables us to do that. It's like, okay, now here's your options, choose.
I like that shift in mindset, and I think those are two examples, really actionable examples, that I think our listeners can take away and start to apply choice architecture to their deals.
I love pricing, and John, we can talk about it 10 other times. We can just keep going. It is so much fun, but we will spare everyone that potential misery. So
we'll save that for future episodes.
Right. We'll save it for future episodes. All right, John, until next time.
Until next time.
Thanks for listening to Breaking Biz Dev. Subscribe on Spotify and Apple Podcasts, or listen to the show at breakingbizdev.com. This episode was produced by Red Cedar Marketing. If you think a business podcast is right for your company, visit redcedarmarketing.com to learn more.